In 1973, the choir of St. Mary's Chapel in rural Pennsylvania sang its final hymn before falling into a silence no one could explain. 4 decades later, a young priest restoring the chapel heard voices rising from within, voices that hadn't sung in 40 years. The wind moved softly through the pines that surrounded St. Mary's, carrying the faint scent of rain and candle wax. Inside the chapel, the air still held the ghost of music, a silence that wasn't empty, but waiting. Why did the choir fall silent that night, and whose voices returned echoing through stone walls long abandoned by time? For decades, believers wondered if God had turned away, or if something holy had simply gone unheard. By the end of this story, you'll know the truth buried beneath the choir loft, the secret that bound faith, grief, and redemption in a single hymn. Welcome to Bible Stories and Mysteries. Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because tonight the voices of St. Mary's will sing again. It was the evening of October 19, 1973. A pale fog rolled down from the Appalachian Hills, swallowing the narrow road that led to St. Mary's Chapel. Inside, 12 voices were rehearsing the final hymn for Sunday Mass, Ave Verum Corpus. The wooden pews trembled with each note. Candles flickered in the drafts that slipped through the stone walls. Sister Agnes, the choir's director, raised her hand for the final verse. The organist pressed his fingers against the worn ivory keys, and the sound froze. A single low chord shuddered through the chapel, then fell silent. At first, everyone thought the power had failed, but the candles were still burning, the light steady, the air utterly still. Then came the sound, not a noise, but the absence of one. The wind outside stopped. The night birds fell quiet. Even the bell rope, swaying from the tower, hung motionless. One by one, the sisters lowered their hymnals. "Can you hear that?" whispered Sister Margaret. "Hear what?" Sister Agnes asked. "Nothing," she said. "That's what I mean, nothing at all." The silence was heavy, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Some said the floorboards groaned beneath their feet. Others swore they felt a vibration under the altar, a distant hum coming from below. Sister Agnes turned toward the choir loft, where the organ pipes stood tall like a forest of brass. A faint breath of air whispered through them, not played by any hand. "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46. When the priest arrived moments later, he found the choir kneeling. No one spoke. The air smelled faintly of iron, like rain or blood. From that night on, St. Mary's choir never sang again. Days turned into weeks. The organ was inspected, the bell tower repaired, and the sisters prayed for guidance. But the moment they tried to rehearse, the same hush would fall, total suffocating silence. The sound of their voices simply vanished. In December, the diocese ordered the chapel closed. Officially, it was for safety reasons. Unofficially, people whispered that the building had been touched by something unholy, or worse, by a grief heaven refused to lift. Sister Agnes wrote her final entry in the choir ledger before the last Mass. "If God has taken our voices, may He teach us to listen." After that line, the pages are blank. In the years that followed, locals said that on cold autumn mornings, if you stood by the chapel's wooden door, you could hear a faint hum beneath the ground, like a heartbeat under stone. Children dared each other to knock and run. Farmers avoided the path after sunset, but every year on the anniversary of that final rehearsal, the bell rang once, though no one was inside to pull the rope. Some said it was the wind. Others, the sound of the lost hymn echoing back through time. Yet the church's archives would record the event simply as "Silence at St. Mary's, choir dissolved, chapel decommissioned, 1974. But heaven remembers what earth forgets, and 40 years later, the silence began to break. 40 years after the silence fell, the road to St. Mary's lay hidden beneath wild vines and the dust of forgotten prayers. Most believed the chapel was gone, swallowed by the forest. But in the spring of 2013, a young priest named Father Thomas arrived from Scranton with a single mission: to restore what time had erased. The first time he saw the chapel, dawn was breaking through a silver fog. The bell tower leaned, the wooden door hung crooked, yet something about the air felt alive. He said later that the silence there was not emptiness, but a kind of breath, as though the stones were still listening for the hymn that had once filled them. Inside, everything was frozen in 1973. Dust lay thick on the organ keys. Hymnals sat open on pews, their pages curled like petals of an old flower. On the altar, a single candle stood unburned, though its wick was black, as if it had once burned itself out in secret. When he touched the choir rail, the echo of footsteps seemed to move above him, but he was alone. He told himself it was imagination, the mind chasing ghosts where faith should dwell. That night, as rain began to fall, Father Thomas recorded the first note in his restoration journal. The chapel breathes, not with sound, but with memory. Something sacred waits here. He returned every day, cleaning the pews, scraping moss from the stained glass windows, repairing the bell rope. Yet the deeper he worked, the more the silence pressed against him. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforts. It was the kind that listens back. One afternoon, while clearing the choir loft, he found a small wooden box carved with the initials AM, Sister Agnes Miller, the last choir director. Inside were 3 objects: a broken rosary, a scrap of sheet music scorched along the edges, and a note written in delicate handwriting, "When the voices return, so will the light." That night, he lit a candle on the altar and read those words aloud. The flame flickered once, then steadied. Then from somewhere above the ceiling came a soft vibration, like distant humming. Father Thomas froze. The organ pipes trembled. He could swear he heard the echo of a single note, faint but real, a woman's voice sustaining a pitch of pure gold. It lasted only a second, then the silence returned. He fell to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, "if this is you, teach me how to listen." The next morning, the air inside St. Mary's smelled of wax and lilac, though no flowers had been placed there. The candle from the night before had burned halfway down, and from that day on, Father Thomas was no longer restoring a chapel. He was awakening it. If you were standing beside him then, you might have heard it too. The faint hum beneath the wooden floor, the first stirrings of what would soon become a faith mystery. Comment below if you believe divine silence can still carry God's voice. Some secrets echo louder than prayers. Days passed in quiet labor. Father Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, restoring the chapel beam by beam, hymn by hymn. Yet something unseen was watching. He began to feel it in the rhythm of his work, the way the wind would rise each time he whispered a prayer, or how the candles flickered even without a draft. One afternoon he opened the organ. Dust fell like ash from the pipes. The metal was cool, yet he could feel warmth beneath his fingertips, as if the instrument were breathing. He pressed a single key. Nothing. Then another, and a faint vibration answered, distant, almost human. That night, as the rain pressed against the windows, he heard it again. A low harmony, like a choir warming up in another room. The sound grew until he could almost name the notes. C, F, then silence again. He called out, "Is someone there?" Only the wind replied. But the next morning, the rosary he had found inside Sister Agnes's box was hanging from the organ handle, though he had left it on the altar. The beads were damp, as if touched by unseen hands. He began to read old records, searching for anything about the choir, parish reports, letters, even rumors. He found one entry from 1973 written by Sister Margaret. "We were told to stop singing, but I still hear them at night, beneath the chapel." Father Thomas lowered the paper and looked toward the floor. The boards near the altar were uneven, slightly raised, as though something beneath was pressing upward. That evening, he knelt and prayed, "If there is truth buried here, show it to me." And for the first time in 40 years, the bell of St. Mary's rang, not once, 3 times. The sound was hollow but clear, echoing through the valley, like a voice finally released from silence. Villagers from the nearby town heard it too. They said it sounded like a woman singing through the wind, her tone both sorrowful and divine. When Father Thomas returned to his journal, he wrote, "It has begun." The next morning, sunlight fell through the stained glass in patterns he hadn't seen before. The red and gold of the Virgin's robe painted the walls with trembling light. He could swear he heard footsteps above him in the loft, soft, measured, in rhythm. And then faintly came the melody again, a human voice, then another, And another. It was the choir. Only this time, there were no people. He stood motionless as invisible harmonies filled the chapel, blending into a hymn older than he knew. It lasted less than a minute, but when it ended, tears ran down his face. He whispered, "They're not gone." Outside, the mist lifted. For the first time in decades, light poured through the chapel windows and reached the ground. The silence had broken, and something holy was awake. If you've ever felt that God was silent in your life, stay with this story, because what happened next at St. Mary's would prove that even silence can be a form of song. The following days blurred together, sunlight and shadow trading places across the worn stones of the chapel. The voices came and went, never on command, never long enough to prove they were real. Father Thomas stopped trying to record them. He began to believe that some miracles exist only for those willing to listen, not to capture. But one morning, as he knelt in prayer before the altar, a draft rose through the floorboards. It carried a smell unlike the rest of the chapel, earth and something older. He lifted the corner of a loose plank, and there it was, a hollow space beneath the altar, sealed by stone. Inside, the air was cold. He lit a candle, and the flame wavered as if touched by a breath from below. He reached down and found a small wooden cross wrapped in a piece of linen, stiff with age. Under it, a parchment, faded but still legible, bearing Sister Agnes's handwriting. "We sang until the air itself broke. What silenced us was not fear but love." The words trembled in his hands. Beneath them another line, "We offered our voices for the souls lost in the flood." Father Thomas sat back, his mind racing. There had been a flood in 1973, a tragedy that had taken dozens of lives in the nearby valley. No record had ever tied it to St. Mary's, but perhaps the sisters had known. Perhaps their hymn that night had been an offering, a prayer so powerful it crossed the boundary between life and death. He looked again into the hollow. There were remains, small, fragile bones, carefully placed in a circle as if in eternal prayer. 12 sets, the 12 singers of the St. Mary's choir. He closed his eyes. Lord, they never left. The candle flame bent toward the opening, its light flickering softly over the bones. And then, from deep within the earth, the music began again. Not from the choir loft this time, but from below, rising through the cracks like incense, slow and radiant. He could hear all 12 voices now, singing in perfect harmony. Ave Verum Corpus. The same hymn that had ended their lives now filled the chapel again, but this time it was peaceful, no fear, no breaking, only light. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "You finished the song." Outside, the valley wind carried the melody farther than the bell ever could. People working in distant fields paused, turning toward the hills, uncertain whether they were hearing memory or miracle. And in the journal, Father Thomas wrote his final entry for that day. The silence was their sacrifice, the song was their redemption. Faith mystery had become truth beneath his hands. The buried truth was not about death, but about devotion strong enough to survive it. If this story moves you, tell me in the comments what you believe happened that night. Was it divine justice, or the echo of love stronger than time itself? In the weeks that followed the discovery, Father Thomas stopped sleeping. Each night he lay awake in the old rectory beside the chapel, listening. The voices did not return in song, but he could feel their presence, the quiet hum beneath the earth, the faint pressure in the air before dawn. The diocese had begun asking questions. News of the strange sounds had reached them through the villages. They wanted a report, a statement, an explanation. But what could he say? That the dead had finished their hymn, that faith had become sound again beneath the soil. He sat at his desk, staring at the letter from the bishop. The candle beside him trembled, its wax forming a small pool that reflected his own unease. The truth had found him, but now he had to decide if it was his to reveal. When he returned to the chapel the next morning, the mist was heavy and the sun pale. He opened the door and whispered, "I need to know what you want me to do." The answer came not in words, but in sound. The organ played 3 soft notes, no hands on the keys, no wind in the pipes, just 3 pure tones that hung in the air like a response from heaven. He sank to his knees. "You want silence to remain?" he asked softly. And again, the organ breathed once, then fell still. He realized then that the miracle wasn't meant for proof or spectacle. It was a covenant of love between God and those 12 souls who had given their voices to save others. To expose it would be to break what was sacred. Yet part of him feared the cost of silence. Would hiding the truth be disobedience? Would faith demand witness or reverence? He thought of Sister Agnes's note, "When the voices return, so will the light." The light had returned. Perhaps that was enough. As he stood to leave, something caught his eye near the choir loft. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, shaped like a woman standing beside the old organ. She didn't move, didn't speak, yet he felt peace rather than fear. Her presence filled the air like a prayer answered. Then she was gone, leaving only the smell of lilac and a single whisper carried through the rafters. "Listen, and let it be." That evening, Father Thomas sealed the parchment and bones beneath the altar once more, restoring the floor as he had found it. He wrote a single line in his journal. Faith does not always ask to be seen. Sometimes it asks to be kept. He never sent the bishop's letter. Instead, he reopened the chapel quietly to the villagers. Every Sunday, he lit 12 candles and read the same psalm the sisters had sung before their final hymn. The people didn't know why the air inside St. Mary's felt different, only that it did. Some said they could feel warmth on their skin as if sunlight moved from within the stone itself. And every year on October 19th, the bell would ring 3 times at dusk. Father Thomas never claimed credit, never spoke of the miracle. He simply listened, because now he understood. Faith isn't about proving what happened, but living as though it still does. So I'll ask you, what would you have done in his place? Would you have revealed the sacred secret or guarded it in silence? Tell me your answer in the comments. Your faith might see what his eyes could not. Autumn returned quietly to the hills of Pennsylvania. The leaves had turned the color of old fire, and the valley once again smelled of rain and wood smoke. St. Mary's Chapel stood peaceful among the pines, its stone walls glowing faintly beneath the setting sun. That October marked exactly 40 years since the night the choir had fallen silent. Father Thomas, older now and slower in step, prepared the chapel for evening mass. He lit 12 candles, 1 for each sister, and placed them in a circle before the altar. The bell rope hung untouched, yet every breath of wind seemed to make it sway, as if remembering its purpose. He opened the hymnal Sister Agnes had left behind, the one with the burned edges, and traced the faded ink with his finger. The last hymn they ever sang, Ave Verum Corpus. He whispered to the empty room, "If there is still a voice left in heaven for them, let it be heard." For a long time there was nothing, only the sound of the candle flames, small and patient. Then, without warning, the organ exhaled. A single chord filled the air, soft as dawn breaking over snow. Another note followed, then another. The sound gathered, blooming through the chapel, until every beam of wood and every pane of glass trembled with it. Father Thomas felt the vibration deep in his chest, as though his heart were being tuned to a higher key. He looked up toward the choir loft and froze. In the mist of candlelight, 12 faint silhouettes stood in perfect stillness. Their veils shimmered like waves of light. The voices rose together, not as echoes, but as real sound, pure, flawless, alive. The hymn poured through the chapel, rich and eternal, filling every shadow that silence had claimed. Ave, Ave, the language of heaven returned to the earth that had once entombed it. Father Thomas fell to his knees. He was not afraid. He was home. The villagers outside, drawn by the bell that now rang on its own, gathered at the doorway. Some wept, others prayed aloud. Those who listened said the sound wasn't just music, it was peace made audible. Inside, the light grew brighter, until it no longer seemed like candlelight, but something uncreated. The very air shimmered with warmth. And when the final note faded, the silhouettes dissolved into that light, leaving behind only stillness and 12 flames that refused to die. He whispered through tears, "Light entered where faith had once fled." Then the bell rang once more, clear, perfect, free. The next morning, the villagers found Father Thomas asleep before the altar, the hymnal still open in his hands. He was alive, but different. his eyes brighter, his silence deeper. He never spoke of what he saw that night. But from then on, the chapel was never silent again. Sometimes at dusk, when the sun hits the stained glass just right, a chorus can still be heard faintly beneath the sound of the wind. It isn't haunting, it's homecoming. And every year since, pilgrims have come from miles away to hear what cannot be recorded, the song that exists only for those who still believe. Because the choir of St. Mary's did not die in 1973, it was simply waiting for someone to listen. In the years that followed, St. Mary's became a place of quiet pilgrimage. No signs, no announcements, no grand ceremonies, only a small wooden cross at the gate and the sound of wind moving through the trees. Those who came seeking proof found none. Those who came seeking peace found more than they could name. Father Thomas continued his service until old age bent his back and stilled his hands. He walked the path to the chapel every morning at dawn, rain or frost or fog, carrying the same candle he had lit on the night the voices returned. He would place it on the altar, whisper a prayer, and listen. Sometimes there was only silence. Sometimes faintly, a single note drifted through the air, gentle, pure, belonging to no one living. Whenever it came, he would close his eyes and smile, because he understood now that faith is not the opposite of silence. It is what survives inside it. He died quietly one winter morning, seated in the same pew where he had once first heard the unseen choir. The villagers found him with the hymnal still open on his lap, his lips curved in what looked like the beginning of a word. When they buried him beside the chapel, the sky was pale with snow. As the last clump of earth fell onto the coffin, the bell of St. Mary's rang 12 times. No one touched the rope. And for a moment, everyone swore they heard voices singing in the wind. Familiar, eternal, alive. The chapel still stands. Its stones are older, its windows repaired, its doors always open. The 12 candles never go out. Each evening, a faint glow can be seen from the road below. Travelers stop, unsure why, drawn by something they can't explain. Some enter and pray. Others simply sit in the silence. And if you listen long enough, you might hear it too, the soft hum beneath the floorboards, the echo of 12 faithful hearts keeping time with eternity. Because the silence that once haunted St. Mary's was never a curse, it was a covenant, a promise that where faith remains, no song is ever truly lost. If this story moved you, comment "Faith Remains." Share it with someone who needs to remember that even in silence, God still speaks. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for more stories where light and mystery meet beneath the chapel.